Hi, folks. Welcome back. You know, it's hard to say exactly when America became a performance art piece, but if you listen closely, you can still hear the echoes of our national IQ doing a trust fall off the Hollywood sign. We've entered a moment where illegal immigration isn't just tolerated, it's practically union-endorsed, live-streamed, and egged on like it's Coachella for dummies. Democrats have moved from defund the police to defend the illegals, and somehow they still pretend it's the moral high ground. In today's breakdown, we're diving headfirst into the dystopian theater of downtown LA, where ICE agents arresting fugitives are treated like villains and protesters hurl eggs in defense of open borders. Because nothing says civil rights like obstructing federal law with brunch ingredients. Strap in, because the party of lawlessness and mental disorder is once again clutching its pearls while handing out megaphones to chaos. Let's take a look.
We are back in the Fashion District. This is the Ambiance apparel store where the FBI, Homeland Security, and ICE agents have been performed a raid a couple of hours ago, and they were inside for quite some time. And we're just now seeing some people that are being detained, being brought out from the facility here. About a couple dozen people that are now being taken into custody. Now, the FBI had brought in some reinforcements to help with the crowd control that had started to surround the building earlier on, and there was quite a scuffle, as a matter of fact, as they were trying to make room for these vans to make their way into the parking lot, where they are now detaining several people from the Ambiance apparel store here in the Fashion District. And you see some of that crowd that still remains to the rear of the facility with all the FBI agents and a couple of the Bearcats that arrived here. So they did need to bring in some backup here to help with the crowd control so that they can bring in these vans. Now we're seeing a couple people being detained. This is one of a few raids we have seen early this morning, and two locations in regards to this particular company, Ambiance. Live in Sky 5 and Rich Prickett. Send it back to you.
All right, Rich, just want to point out what you see earlier. This is what took place in the Westlake District. That was this morning. That was another raid, and now we've got this separate raid taking place in the Fashion District.
And Rich, we don't know the exact nature of these raids, but during the last hour, I believe, we saw some sort of scuffle taking place in the streets. Not sure if they were activists, but they were people on the ground, and they were using their bodies to obstruct vehicles that were actually driving by. So we've had some close calls here.
I think it's safe to say that the images out of Los Angeles look like something between a dystopian flash mob and a live-action role play of a Berkeley freshman's social media feed. Federal agents are executing lawful immigration warrants on people in the country illegally, mind you, and suddenly it's an insurrection of TikTok lawyers, union brass, and self-deputized protesters throwing themselves in front of vans like they're auditioning for a reboot of Les Miserables, Sanctuary City edition. Welcome to America in 2025, where upholding immigration law is treated like an act of violence, and obstructing law enforcement is just another expression of community values. Now let's get serious for a moment, because the deeper issue here isn't about immigration per se, it's about the total inversion of order, identity, and institutional responsibility. What we're witnessing is the end result of a cultural project that's been years in the making, one where the rule of law is selectively applied, moral clarity is traded for emotional performance, and public sympathy is engineered not for the law-abiding, but for those who openly defy the system, so long as they belong to the right identity group or narrative category. And let's talk about the narrative, because it's powerful, well-funded, and endlessly repeated. It goes like this. Federal agents are inherently oppressive. The justice system is systematically racist, and undocumented migrants are victims of colonialism whose presence here is not only justified, but morally superior to the laws of the country they entered. That's not an exaggeration. That's the subtext of every speech by officials like Karen Bass, our mayor, who called these lawful arrests an act of terror. When the mayor of a major American city categorizes basic enforcement of immigration law as terrorism, you have to ask, who is actually in charge and whose side are they actually on? This isn't about compassion. It's about control. It's about eroding national sovereignty under the guise of civil rights. And it's no coincidence that the loudest voices in opposition to these raids are the same voices pushing for open borders, voting rights for non-citizens, and the expansion of federal benefits to people with no legal status. Why? Because in the progressive imagination, borders are a form of violence, and enforcing them threatens the ideological fantasy that all cultures, laws, and systems are interchangeable, except, of course, when it comes to enforcing their power. And here's where things get dangerous. The moment public officials choose to delegitimize federal enforcement in favor of crowd sentiment, they're not just virtue signaling, they're actively undermining the social contract. Law ceases to be law. It becomes conditional based on media framing, activist approval, and narrative utility of whoever is getting arrested. And once that happens, why stop at immigration? Why not block police from arresting shoplifters? Oh, wait, that already happened. Why not remove bail, reduce felonies, and let violent criminals walk free? Oh yeah, that's all in progress. And to be clear, what we're seeing isn't resistance, it's replacement. The slow swap of one moral order for another. One where feelings eclipse facts, where slogans override statutes, and where the mob takes precedence over merit, evidence, or accountability. It's not grassroots, it's institutional. These aren't random protesters. They're often backed by unions, nonprofits, and politicians who benefit from a destabilized, emotionally reactive public. They don't want calm, they want chaos. They want a crisis that never ends, so they can keep redefining justice in their own image. This is the cost of turning politics into therapy and law into narrative management. And unless more people wake up to that fact, we're not just going to lose control of our borders, we're going to lose control of reality itself.
We are going to fight for all Angelenos, regardless of when they got here, whether they have papers or not. We are a city of immigrants, and this impacts hundreds of thousands of Angelenos.
Here's a question, folks. What do you get when you cross a failed revolutionary with a luxury real estate portfolio and a deep misunderstanding of federal law? Apparently, the mayor of Los Angeles. Mayor Karen Bass didn't stumble into chaos. She marched straight into it, waving a Venceremos flag. This is a woman who was literally trained by a Marxist front in Cuba to destabilize the United States from within. And decades later, she's doing that just from inside City Hall. Her latest declaration that LA will fight for all Angelenos, whether they have papers or not, isn't just reckless rhetoric. It's an ideological middle finger to national sovereignty and an open admission that the laws of the United States don't apply to her jurisdiction because feelings, or some other communist mumbo jumbo. And let's be clear, Los Angeles is not her personal sandbox for social experiments. It's a major American city, one that's now being run like an activist nonprofit with $1 billion budget and zero accountability. What Bass is saying here isn't compassionate. It's an outright invitation to lawlessness. She's not defending immigrants. She's defending the erosion of borders, the collapse of order, and the weaponization of identity politics to protect her own ideological fiefdom. And this is the same mayor, by the way, who just a few months ago allowed large swaths of our city to quite literally burn to the ground. And those areas have not recovered yet. Entire neighborhoods in Pacific Palisades were reduced to ashes while Karen Bass was sipping cocktails in Ghana. When she finally returned, her priorities weren't firefighting, they were optics management. She smiled awkwardly, said the right words in quotes, and tried to pivot back to her talking points on unity and resistance, like she had just cut millions from the fire department budget a few months earlier. That crisis in and of itself made it evident that Karen Bass isn't about running a city. She's about mismanagement. So I think it goes without saying that what we're seeing in Los Angeles isn't just a crisis of leadership, it's the natural result of electing someone whose entire worldview was shaped by radical activism and anti-American indoctrination. Remember, this is the same Karen Bass who praised Fidel Castro as Comandante en Jefe and gave a eulogy for a senior member of the Communist Party in the United States. She didn't hide those beliefs. She wore them like a badge of honor. And now those beliefs are playing out in real time through sanctuary policies that defy federal law, through DEI hires that replace competence with identity, and through a cult of victimhood that justifies any failure so long as it's cloaked in the language of equity. Bass's tenure as LA mayor is a case study in what happens when ideology replaces governance. You get a hollowed out bureaucracy, crumbling infrastructure, rising homelessness, soaring crime, and city leaders who think upholding the law is the real offense. When she says we are a city of immigrants, what she means is we are a city of ideological clients, people she can permanently entrench as victims to justify her power and delegitimize our nation. And here's a cultural turning point. The left has moved from demanding rights to demanding exemption, from citizenship, from accountability, and now from the law itself. That's what Bass is selling us. Not sanctuary, but secession. Soft secession by policy decree. It's the breakdown of the republic dressed up as compassion. So yes, when people say she should be arrested for obstructing ICE, that's not hyperbole. It's called enforcing federal law. But of course, in the twisted theology of progressive governance, law enforcement is violence, anarchy is justice, and anyone who disagrees is just a bigot clinging to outdated ideas like borders, budgets, or basic competence. This is where America is in 2025. We've got activists in charge of empires, and they're running like they still have something to protest. But when the smoke clears, and it will, the question won't be whether Karen Bass should be removed from office. The question will be how much of the damage can still be reversed, and whether the people of Los Angeles are finally ready to choose leadership over a communist ideology.
Well, I came down because I knew that there were some of the leaders here of some of the immigrants organizations. There were union leaders here and families, and I wanted to talk to them directly about what happened here a few hours ago. And frankly, I'm just outraged because what happened is that when ICE went in, they just took people away. And we just can't have this in our city. And it happened multiple places in the city. And what it does is that it sows a sense of terror throughout the community. For example, one location at a Home Depot, there was raids there. ICE was literally chasing people down the street. And then later on today, there's a graduation a few blocks away. What are the parents going to feel? Are they going to feel that they can go to their kids' graduation, or they can't because they're not safe?
Can you tell us a little bit more about the conversations that you had? Were they with coworkers? Were they with family members? Any idea how many people were taken from here?
No, I don't. I don't know the numbers. I think it's under 50, but I'm not sure. Because this is so recent, we're still trying to gather all of the data. But what I do know is that one of the presidents of our local union, USWW, David Huerta, was arrested here, was, I guess, assaulted to the point where he's in the hospital. I'm going to the hospital next to see what's happened to him. He was here as a witness, and there were several people who were here as witnesses to what was going on.
You always tell me that one of your most proud things being mayor of Los Angeles is that we are a city of immigrants. We're a diverse city. Is today one of your worst nightmares come true?
Well, you know, yes, I've been really worried about this from the beginning. And as far as I know, this is the first time this has happened in our city like this. We know ICE has been here, but it's been for targeted arrests. This was just mass chaos. And it sows a sense of chaos in our city and a sense of terror. And it's just unacceptable.
But here's what actually happened. I was there. I saw it firsthand. Federal agents were executing legal warrants. Local police were present to keep order, not crack skulls, not to escalate, but to de-escalate the mob that showed up after the arrest began. The chaos didn't come from ICE. It came from activists, many waving Mexican flags, some in black bloc gear, clearly organized and ready to provoke. These weren't traumatized mothers clutching their children. These were seasoned agitators blocking vans, screaming through megaphones and trying to turn law enforcement into a spectacle. And Mayor Bass, she walked straight into that with open arms for the agitators. This is what people need to understand. The left thrives on appearance of disorder because it justifies their grip on power. Bass talks about fear and chaos like it's ISIS's fault, but what actually spreads fear is a mayor telling illegal immigrants they're above the law and telling legal citizens that enforcing the law is an act of violence. That's not compassion. That's straight up subversion. And this is a very real pattern. Karen Bass has a long history of standing with radicals and calling it equity. She trained with the Venceremos Brigade, a Cuban-backed Marxist indoctrination group that exists to export revolution to American soil. None of this is accidental, folks. Bass didn't stumble into a socialist worldview. She imported it and now governs through it. She governs by emotional blackmail. If you support immigration enforcement, you're heartless. If you question sanctuary policies, you're racist. If you expect elected officials to prioritize public safety, you're part of a system of oppression. That's the ideological playbook she's working from. And let's be clear, it's not about helping immigrants. It's about destabilizing national identity so that identity itself becomes meaningless, except, of course, when it's politically useful. Bass even says she's, quote unquote, afraid parents won't attend their kids' graduations because of ICE raids. But what about families burned out of their homes because she slashed the fire department's budget after they endorsed her opponent? What about the people who lost everything while she was in Ghana attending a presidential cocktail party? What about the residents whose neighborhoods have turned into crime zones because their focus is on DEI alignment rather than competency? She calls this a nightmare, but the nightmare isn't enforcement. It's what happens when enforcement is demonized. When mobs with flags from foreign countries dictate whether U.S. law is valid. When union bosses, who are supposed to represent legal workers, start interfering with federal operations. When elected officials would rather protect feelings than enforce our laws. It has never been more clear by looking at LA that the Democrat establishment has fused with radical activist networks. They use emotional narratives to justify the erosion of law, the abandonment of sovereignty, and the rise of mob rule. And Karen Bass isn't just complicit, she's a figurehead for this kind of movement. A legacy activist turned mayor who views law enforcement as the enemy and sees chaos as an opportunity. The irony is, Bass talks about dignity for immigrants, yet reduces them to permanent victims, tools for political leverage, not human beings accountable to a system that millions followed legally. Millions follow legally to this day every year. And the chaos she claims to denounce, well, that's not accidental. It's orchestrated. It's strategic. It's all for political gain. And worst of all, it's rewarded. If we want our great city of Los Angeles to survive, let alone thrive, we need to stop electing activists masquerading as executives, because people like Karen Bass don't want to lead. They want to agitate. They want to erode us from within. And until that's understood, we'll keep mistaking subversion for compassion and rebellion for justice. So ask yourself, how much longer can a nation survive when its leaders no longer believe in its laws, its borders, or even its right to exist as a sovereign entity? When truth is rebranded as cruelty and chaos is marketed as compassion, who really benefits and who pays the price? These aren't isolated failures. They're symptoms of a deeper rot, a political class that sees disorder as leverage and obedience to the law as optional. If everything is negotiable, citizenship, safety, authority, then what exactly are we preserving? And more importantly, who's brave enough to say enough is enough? Because at some point, silence isn't neutrality. It's just straight up surrender. You tell me what you think in the comments down below. Have a terrific day. Peace.